Hey there, Mama, and welcome back to the Moms Overcoming Overwhelm podcast, episode number 201. I'm Emily McDermott, and I am beside you on this journey as we work together to declutter your home, head, and heart. I was asking my community what room to focus on for our very last episode in the Room by Room series. And one of the recommendations that I got was to give tips about decluttering and organizing craft/hobby rooms. Now, I am not a crafty person, and I certainly do not have a craft room. So this was a great challenge for me. But I am very excited to share my 5 steps, which just happen to be an acronym using the word craft to help you with this task. So, what do you say? Grab that notebook and pen, and let's dive into today's episode. So, last episode, episode 200, I got to interview the amazing Rochelle Crawford, and we talked about her book, How to Be Busy. I had a giveaway for the book, and I really want to thank everyone that shared the show or wrote a review for the podcast. It just means so much to me. And I want to announce the winner of the book is Marissa Bravo. Yay, bravo. You probably get that a lot. So I will be getting in touch with you to send the book to you. And be sure that you are listening to the podcast to find out more about giveaways that we're going to have in the future. And I always appreciate you leaving me that review in your favorite podcast player or sharing it with a friend. All right, let's go ahead and dive in. This is a super tactical episode. Hope you have that notebook and pen ready. Now, you may not have a designated room simply for crafting or hobbies. It might be part of a different space, like an office, for example, or perhaps like a multi-purpose room, like a basement, and you just have part of that devoted for your craft and or hobby. And I'm just going to say craft room from now on, but obviously it may not necessarily be crafting. But these tips are going to apply regardless of the space that you are working with and the size of the space. Now, crafting supplies are a really difficult decluttering category because it tends to become very aspirational. And we talk about aspirational clutter in episode 10. It's one of the main types of clutter that we deal with as moms because perhaps pre-kids, you had a ton of time to be able to do these different crafting activities that you really enjoyed, or maybe just drawing or artwork or something like that. And then we have kids and everything changes and our free time is very limited if we have any at all. And so then we hold on to things because someday I'm going to have the time to do said crafting project. So that's something we're going to talk about in the episode. And also, when you have projects that are started but not finished, the question is, what do we do with those? How much space do we want to give to those? Especially because the main purpose of the crafting area is to be able to actively do something. Okay? So we're going to get started. Again, I'm using this acronym CRAFT. So the first is the letter C, and I'm actually using craft as the verb. We want to craft our vision for the space. So I've mentioned throughout the Room by Room series the 3 F's, which is how do I want this room to feel, function, and flow. And we want to ask ourselves the same questions for this particular space, but especially for the function, that's super important. So here's a couple questions that you can ask yourself. What specific activities do you want to do in the space? Is it that you're just switching out the different activities within the same limited space? Or is it that one part is maybe for sewing, you have another part for maybe scrapbooking? How is the space being used? And who all will be doing activities in the space? Is it just you? Or is it going to include your kids, maybe your spouse if that applies? Because when it comes to accessibility of different supplies, you need to keep that in mind. Also, what space is there for active projects versus those unfinished in-process projects? And if you have a limited amount of space, then we want to prioritize the space for actively creating, but we need to have limits around what is used for those unfinished projects because function and accessibility are key in this process. Okay, so that is C, to really just kind of reflect and to be thinking about that. And then the R is to reflect on your current season, and season of life is what I'm talking about. So if you have a baby or young kids, you're probably not spending as much time crafting or working on these projects as you would like. And what you own should really reflect the season of life that you're in right now. That goes for your clothing, that goes for anything reflective of your activities, goes for your books, all of these different categories. Aspirational clutter is not just like, oh, it would be nice to get to that someday, so I'm going to hold on to it for a while. If it's making you feel bad because you don't have the time and you're like, oh my gosh, I used to have time to do scrapbooking. Now I'm up all night with the baby. I don't have time to do this anymore. This is really frustrating. If it's making you feel really bad about that season that you're in, then it's probably best that you're letting go of those things, knowing that doesn't mean you're giving it up forever. It just means in the meantime that someone else can benefit from the things that you aren't using currently. So asking yourself, could someone else benefit from the things that I'm not going to be able to use for 3 months, 6 months, a year more? And I know that for certain supplies, there may not be any kind of expiration date, but for other things, maybe like paints or some of these things, if you're just letting them sit, it's not really good. So it's probably best to allow someone to use them. And then when the time comes when you can resume that activity, that you can just buy something new that's actually going to work better for you. So recognizing your limited capacity in this season and then thinking about the realistic use of your time. So even if you had an afternoon to yourself, if you have young kids or a baby or something, are you really going to be going into your crafting room and doing a craft? Maybe the answer is yes, but is it more likely you're going to be resting or reading or catching up on the housework? And that's okay, but really thinking realistically about how you would use those pockets of time and not holding on to things that are going to make you feel bad about yourself. So that is C and R. Now we're going to move to A, which is to assign specific spaces for each category or subcategory of your crafting supplies. So depending on your organizing style, you might have a macro style or perhaps a micro style. I definitely am micro. According to my husband, a little too micro, because there's no right or wrong way, but it needs to be where you can easily find and locate what you need. That is the level of organization that you need to strive for. And for example, you might want to have all of the kids' crafting and art supplies just in one bin, or you might want to separate things by activities. So you have like the painting stuff all together, you have the Play-Doh together, and you have these different things. It really depends on your preference and your style. And just knowing that the end goal is to be able to access it easily, to use it easily, and to put it away. So you can assign the organization system that you want, but then also the specific space. And this is dependent on the energy that we have in order to manage it, and then the physical confines of the crafting space that you're working with. So if it's a whole room, it might be different than if you just have part of a room. So you're wanting to say, okay, well, the main crafting activity that I do, or the main thing I do, is sewing. So I really want to make sure that I have room for my fabrics. Or I do crocheting, so I really want to make sure that I have room for like my yarn and my needles. You have to prioritize things based upon their value to you and then assign the space based upon that. And then, no surprise, we're going to F, fill that boundary. So using the container concept that we talk about in episode 6, we're going to be filling the container, but we want to focus on the best quality items that you're most likely to use for that project. And it might mean that if you find a lot of seasonal types of items, that those might need to go with like seasonal decor somewhere else, and that you're focusing on, okay, what am I going to be using and wanting to use right now? And remembering your capacity to actually be able to manage everything in the room, especially if it's not just you using it, but also your kids are using it, because they would, depending on age, need to be involved in putting things away and knowing where they are. So all of that comes into play. And then the last letter is to T, take the remainder and decide where it's going to go. So anything that you're not keeping. And there are a lot of options for craft and hobby supplies. Obviously, if things are not in good condition and you're like, yeah, there's no way I would ever use this and I wouldn't ever want to donate it because it's just really not in good shape, you can throw it away. There are options for recycling. I'm going to put some of these links in the show notes for you, but trashy.io, which I actually use for my clothing recycling, they take fabric scraps. So that's something to think about. You can ask friends that do similar hobbies in crafting if they would like things. Maybe a mom's group, like I know Momco, sometimes they'll have like a swap table and you could bring it there at a meeting. There are also things called creative reuse centers. And I looked it up and there's one actually really close to me, and they specialize in reusing any sort of artistic or creative project items. So check to see if there's one in your area. There's obviously buy nothing groups, depending on where you are. There's probably someone that has a similar crafting or craft or hobby as you like to do. And then there's also schools or daycare centers, women's shelters. All of these are great options. And if you're not sure whether you want to keep something or not, you can always use the out of sight, out of mind bin, but really limiting the space and giving yourself a realistic time frame. Now, this might be a little different than clothing, which is more seasonal. It might be just your season of life, and you're like, okay, once my kids are, going back to school, or once they are napping, or once they're doing whatever in 6 months, then I'm going to see if I come back to this. But having a deadline is really important, because the difference between a maybe pile and having that out of sight, out of mind bin is having a deadline and then realistically saying, okay, I haven't used it in 6 months. I'm likely not going to use it. Let's look at some of these options to let it go. So there you go. Those are my recommendations for decluttering and organizing your craft room. So let's review them really quick. C is to craft your vision for the space. R is to reflect on your current season. A is to assign a specific space for each category or subcategory, depending on your organizational style. F is to fill the boundary using the container concept. And T is to take the remainder and then decide where it will go. So make sure you check out the show notes for all of those resources that I mentioned. Thank you for all the inspiration for the Room by Room series. I will be providing in the show notes a playlist if you just want to listen to the episodes about the different specific rooms, then that's great. And then you can certainly come on over to our free Facebook group, tinyurl.com/moms overcoming overwhelm. We just finished a decluttering challenge. We're going to be starting one in August with a very interesting theme, boy band. You're like, what does boy bands, what do they have to do with decluttering? Well, you're going to find out if you join the group. So come on over. We'd love to have you. And otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will talk to you soon. Bye for now.